to show directions where to see, but not to look and see what it is. Only they show directions. And second is a very funny incident because I had gone to IT Chennai to meet my wife there. So I'm telling some lessons he gave. That was on a Friday night. I got a call from unusual call from him at time 10 o'clock. He asked me, "Viju, where are you?" I told I'm in Chennai. I didn't inform me. I thought I'd get a banging and firing. But to my surprise, his reply was, "I feel extremely sorry to disturb you at this time. You come after 2-3 days or 4 days comfortably." So that was a very surprising moment for me. So the lesson I learned is that you have to have compassion and show humane behavior to the students and subordinates. And last is one incident. I have so many, but I have just limited to 3. After my tenure in IIC, I went back to BSSC. I was working. I got a call after 3 months. He asked me, "Viju, are you coming to France?" What for, sir? There is a conference where we can present your work. Then I told it's not possible because I've been away from the office for quite long. It's not possible. Then shall I make a request to you, sir? So why? What kind of request? He told, "Can I go and present your result?" "Sir, what is this? You are asking me the permission." Then he told, "It's the responsibility. You did the work. So it's a responsibility. It's my responsibility to ask you before that." So the lesson I learned is give respect, take respect. So in each and every moment, he was giving lessons, not academics alone. And before I finish this, one more very strange incident happened because I had uploaded this paper in the AASA, Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and the system generated an auto-generated password that is the US server. And that paper was uploaded in 2007 January. And after 5 months, on June 5th, he left us. Then I became very sad. I went to the website and I was trying to find out the reason, because he had kidney cancer at that time. I was trying to find out more about this disease. Then I understood that the symptom of kidney cancer is seeing blood stains in urine. I remember that day I called Sona sir. He is also one of his former students. But by that time already he knew about this, his demise. So the point was written is seeing the blood stains in urine as that condition is called hematuria. I was shocked because the password I got 5 months back with myself and Pradeep sir as a co-authors was the same password. So I don't have a scientific explanation for that. But I'm sure Pradeep sir is sitting in the heaven and showing us the guiding light. And I'm sure that all his students will follow the path he wanted, and we will live the life the way he lived. Thank you very much. Thank all the people who supported for making this event a reality today. Before we go to the next speaker, we would like to show a small video, 5 minutes video, which we made on Dr. S. Pradeep so that everyone will know who he was. That was Dr. Pradeep's for you. I invite Professor Govindan Ragarajan sir, Dr. Ram Rao sir, Sonal sir, Dr. Nikrishnan sir, and Pratap Kumar Das for inaugurating the program and offering floral tributes. We can take the seats. Madam. I request Anjana to offer floral tributes, and also Dr. Sunil, Dr. and Sally. I invite Professor Golden Natarajan sir for giving the welcome address.
Yeah, warm welcome to all of you. On behalf of the Institute of Science, I would like to welcome the entire audience to this talk. It's a deep feeling that we are commemorating the memory of Mr. Modi through such a talk by a very distinguished person, Somnath, Chair of ISRO. So I think all of you are eagerly waiting for this talk. So let me be brief, but it's nice to see the hall so full. It tells you the interest in the whole Chandrayaan mission, what ISRO is doing. So it's really great to see. I hope many more talks are attended in this fashion. Thank you all. Yeah.
I invite Dr. Prahlad also for giving the presidential address.
All friends, young and also young. So nice to see Somnath to sit around here. So you know everything about Pradeep. It's a great English teacher. I think respect his contribution and allow you to enjoy what Somnath has brought us. Thank you very much.
I invite Dr. Nikishan sir to give the speech. Very good afternoon. Our beloved Secretary DOIs, Professor Golden, the Director of this Institute, Dr. Prahlad Rao, Dr. Siddharam, Chairman of AICP and family of Dr. Pradeep, faculties, students, outstanding students, those who are standing there in the back. So I came to this institute in 1993. It's an entire student. So not through my career to retire. Time was not a constraint for me because I used to complete all that answers 1 hour before and then go to play. I never get good mark per state. But I was challenged when I came to this institute. Here I have processed to give 70 questions, 1 hour. And then we ask to write all the questions. Whoever is writing maximum will take us 100%. So it was a very tough time. But the first semester, even I thought of going back.
why should I take this trouble? So it was a nice experience. I must say that if I take the entire academic career, the 1.5 years that I spent here has transformed me. And this campus has given me a lot of insight and just given me a lot of confidence in going further in my career. And it was really a lighthouse in my career. And he was not a professor, just a teacher. He used to teach Islam, and back then he was teaching, it was a very interesting topic. The news was question. But he was more than a teacher. He used to mix with us, and after every class, he used to walk to the pathway. He was shown the granite pathway to the coffee house. He standing in a long queue, and he spends from his pocket, and he used to give us very strong coffee, which will only keep you wake up in the next class. And we used to run from class to class, from one class to here, that had been casually fun. It was an exciting time, and it was going very fast. And then it was a shock to hear the untimely device of and he's hailing from our place, very close to India, and his place is hardly 10 kilometers. And it was in the year of 2007, that is the year when we had the first successful real-time mission space capsule recovery experiment. And today is again another important day. You know that the Chandrayaan is going to be captured by the most gravity today, and the leader, none other than Sona, is here, is going to talk on that. So it's an exciting event. That's a pity to you to talk about it. Such an excellent academician and a teacher. And the day also, I want to say, is that sense, is the most important day. This one, that's a very so I don't want to prolong because this was standing and like all eagerly waiting to hear a song. Thank you for this event, and also I want to thank all the persons and the personalities behind this event. We used to say better late than never. So, but then we started this. Let us continue this. All the very best. Thank you.
Very sorry, I didn't introduce myself. So sorry. I'm Dr. Vijay Prasad. I'm working as a scientist at the Space Center. I request Sri Sona sir for reminiscing Pradeep sir and his memories, and that will be followed by Chandrayaan-3 mission.
Welcome all of you. On the respected Secretary Sina, Director of IAC, Chair of the Association, Chairman of the ACT, my teachers who are here, those who are there with me during my student days, and also young people who are then filling this hall. My greetings to you all on this occasion. The first Dr. Lee Memorial talk. I got this opportunity and possibility to talk on a very interesting day. If I talk about Dr. Pradeep, the memories of my coming to IAC, being a student in aerospace department for my master's comes back in my mind. I believe it was Dr. Pradeep who came to our class first, the very first teacher who came to my class, and he was talking about flight mechanics, and we knew nothing about it. Though I am coming from aerospace, at that time we were having a little bit of understanding of rockets, not much of aircrafts and the flight of aircrafts. That understanding was not there. It was such an interesting topic. Later he taught us about orbital mechanics, which we are dealing with for the mission to moon, and also the flight of rockets, how to design trajectories and things like that. And all those complex formulations, how to deal with mechanics, which is still a very great semester of that flight mechanics course. When I later, after my course was over, I had to take project work about the aircraft impact, and I was specializing in structures. So all the aircraft were in structures. Then somehow I was not interested in project in structures. I should do something different because though I thought I am reasonably good in structures, I don't want to do more in structures. I thought I should study something else. I thought I should do controls. I didn't take any course on controls. Then I went to a colleague and said that I would like to do some work on controls, and especially control structure interactions, which are very happening in my organization. I used to see a lot of people fighting each other. The structures people want to speak is generally not understood by the controls people. And they always say, what is the generalized mass? They still don't understand what is generalized mass. So, when this conflicts was going on in my organization as a young engineer watching all this drama in reviews, I thought it's the right time for me to study this and make some contribution where I have to join my organization. So I decided I should do something connecting structures and controls. And I approached the producer. He said that this topic requires some background. Then you need to study. Then I went into the other departments like computer science and automation, and I had the opportunity to study courses. I approached I.G. Sharma, then Yuva Prasad. Then I went to mechanical department. I studied action control of mechanical system with Srinivasa. I ordered all these courses just to do my project. Then I came to Kabir and I said this, now I have to do this project. And he helped me to do that project. It was on an against structure assignment to control a fictitious problem in the rocket, vibration, which gave me a great insight on how control system work in rockets. Though it was not the control system we work in typically in a rocket in that we fly, but it was a modern control, totally a different problem. Way back, I had an opportunity to apply this a little bit into when we tried to develop something called flexible trajectory analysis for the reusable rocket which we launched recently, that landed recently. At that time, we were sending to the orbit. The current formulation of how to design flexible rockets, control, and its interaction was done in a very closed form solution method, not into the discretization or finite element formulation. And we were able to do this for reusable launch vehicle, and it was successfully done. And we also did it for GSLV Mark 3 when I was the mission director. While they were doing the traditional closed form solutions for finding out the interaction between structural and control, we were able to do in a finite element domain as well and cross verify, which helped me to launch on the very first launch of GSLV Mark 3, because there was some confusion coming out of the closed form solutions at that time. So thanking him for the insight that he gave me for that topic, which really helped me to understand the finer elements of rocket design, which helped me later in designing the rockets of GSLV Mark 3 and SSLV. But what I tell you is not the topic. Is my work was not such a great work of MTech thesis. It was more of a learning of the subject rather than a contribution to the field, I must admit. But then the interaction with him was entirely different. And the way he asked me to do the work, he gave me, every day he will give me a new problem, new extension of the whole topic. And went on till the end. I was becoming very impatient, but he never left it. And after I drafted the entire thesis, and he took it and did totally a transformation of the thesis himself on his PC. And the way I looked at the whole problem, when he formatted and put it in a different perspective, I really got astonished. How you can see this problem like this as well. Huh? So that was the new thing. And he even taught me LaTeX. I think many of you know that at that LaTeX, Windows was not there when I was a student here. It was in DOS environment. Still we are working. And in the LaTeX, he taught me the beautiful fonts that can be created out of it. And he used those interesting fonts in my thesis as the starting of every paragraph, things like that. He taught me all of that. I still remember. And even in my design project, which we used to do a rocket, he helped in design of the trajectory. That rocket happens to be the GSLV Mark 3 much later, looking similar, not exactly that. So it was such a very interesting interaction during my student days here. This is a great opportunity to pay back to him as a tribute to him as a student, as an alumni of this institute. I thank you for this opportunity, and I must thank all the students of Dr. Pradeep for organizing this and making this as a possibility for paying our thanks to him, our regards to him, and all that this institute gave to us to what we are.
let me stop at this moment. I think I will go to my talk then, right? If you allow me. Thank you so much. And also, I also want to thank the family of Dr. Pradeep who had withstood that loss of Dr. Pradeep at the early age, and still they fought to stay strong, bring up his girl child to this elderly lady who is here, and my greetings to his dear wife as well. Thank you so much. Lights, please. Switch off. Okay. So the topic I selected is Chandrayaan-3, India's moon exploration, knowing very well that there will be a huge crowd like this today. Because it has that topic which is going to have such an interest in each one of you. Many events are happening today, and today happened to be the day the travel of the Chandrayaan-3 to the moon is almost nearing its last phase, and by a retro maneuver, that's a firing that we will do to reduce its speed, the Chandrayaan-3 will be captured on the moon orbit, and it will be in an orbit which is typically 18,000 kilometers in its apogee and maybe 200 and odd kilometers in its perigee. So that's an interesting day. What we are expecting today is that after this capture by 23rd of this month, we will have this image transmitted to Earth, and we are waiting for that to happen. I think I take this opportunity to have the blessings of each one of you for such a wonderful event to happen. Before we start the Chandrayaan-3, I must tell you about the GSLV Mark 3 rocket, and it is this rocket that made this Chandrayaan landing possible. Without this launch capability, even Chandrayaan-2 was not possible. Chandrayaan-3 is also not possible. I am also very proud of the fact that I happen to be the project lead when it made its first launch, and also had opportunity to work on this for long years. Happy to see that's riding safe even after his 6th mission. And the last mission, that was LVM-3M4, which took off. We had this Chandrayaan mounted inside the payload fairing like this. Maybe little more details of the rocket I will give you. And this is a majestic lift off of the rocket from the second launch pad at Satish Dhawan Space Center. The two of the solid boosters firing. You can see the mighty rocket taking off. This is 640 tons of mass, finally putting only 3.8 tons of the spacecraft in the orbit. See the beauty of the rocket when it flies. And just for this pleasure of looking at it, we make it. Okay, the rocket puts the satellite in an orbit of 170 by 36,500 kilometers. That's a design orbit, but mostly the orbit that we achieve will be in few kilometers in error. So that's the dispersion that we indicated there, which has also an orbital element. When I see this argument of perige's word, which I never knew before when I came to ISR, why you are arguing so much with the perige, I thought. So this was again, I asked Dr. Pradeep, I remember what exactly is the physical interpretation of this, and similarly other orbital element terminologies. Of course, that inclination is this, and we have a mass of 3,895 kilogram, which has to be injected in the orbit. Now it has an interesting flight sequence. It starts with a solid boosters in ignition, and once it is almost getting completed, the liquid stage gets into action, and there is a transitioning phase which is managed by the control system properly. And after the end of it, the cryogenic stage comes on and goes to the orbit to inject it with the velocities of almost 10 kilometers per second plus. So this puts in an elliptical orbit around Earth with the specified argument of perigee as well as inclination. And from that point, we track it, find out the orbit, and then do the further velocity addition at the perigee point so as to increase the apogee height further and further until it reaches up to the moon. So I don't go into all of the details because that's not the topic of here. So this is how the Chandrayaan-3 looks like.
And you can see that this is something called the rocket part. It's a composite structure which is called the payload adapter. Very lightweight composite structure capable of taking the mass and the dynamics, frequency constraint, things like that. And this part is the propulsion module or the orbiter. It has an engine, single engine at the center, which will take it from Earth to the moon location. So the entire fuel, the whole of this satellite is filled with fuel, mostly fuel, and the rest of the control systems, sensors, and things like that. And the most important part is the lander, which is sitting on top. You can see there are 4 engines. And the engine here is actually half the powerful as this engine. This develops almost 800 newtons of thrust, whereas the engine in the propulsion module just generates only 440 newtons. So it's not a high thrust engine that takes you to Earth to moon, but landing requires much more powerful engine and much more energy. So killing the velocity and gravity, working against gravity is actually spending a lot of energy. From moving from here to moon takes actually much lesser thrust and effort. So from the craft, you can see these are the 4 legs, which will, the landing legs. And this is the door which will open to bring out the rover outside. So there will be a guiding, sliding track through which the rover will come out. And this is one of the experiments that is put underneath. Of course, this lander is fitted with so many instruments around it, which I'll explain later. So this shows some pictures of the assembly of the rocket. Of course, you would have seen in our website. Who have a habit of visiting ISRO's website regularly must be seeing all these pictures coming in. So don't want to explain all of that. But the spacecraft is still very small compared to the payload firing. You can see it has still more volume, but the whole launch is limited by its mass, not by the volume. Now, before I go into Chandrayaan-3, it must be interesting to you to talk about Chandrayaan-2, because that prompted us to work on Chandrayaan-3. And Chandrayaan-2, all the work we did, the good work we did, but actually overshadowed by the failure to land softly. I think all of you have enough of discussion happening in the social media as well. Why Chandrayaan-2 couldn't land safely, and what are the reasons for the issues that we faced, and how we are going to overcome that trouble in possible that situation developing in Chandrayaan-3, and what we have done. I think this is very important than the mission itself. So you remember that in the Chandrayaan-2 happened almost 4 years back. Today we are at almost 4 years later, plus minus 10-15 days. We are discussing Chandrayaan-2. Chandrayaan-2 was launched on 22nd July, almost the same time, lift-out time, and it traveled all the way to moon. Almost correctly, it went into a 100-kilometer orbit. It did all the maneuvers, and only in the last part of the landing process we had the problem. It had the orbiter. The orbiter is still functioning on the moon with all instruments, and it is still giving a lot of scientific data. Of course, many people won't even speak about what it is doing, orbiter is doing. Orbiter, all the scientific objectives of that has been still met, and a lot of scientists are making use of the data. Lander and rover, there were few instruments, but that couldn't be functioning because it ended up with a very high velocity. So I'll just quickly explain what went wrong with Chandrayaan-2 and what corrective actions that we are doing in Chandrayaan-3 to mitigate all those problems. Let me tell you that a little bit technical now. If you have no interest in flight dynamics, you can ignore. And all those planning of travel of bodies across space is something very, very complex. But it requires a lot of thought process and discussions and coming out with certain methods by which it can be designed. The problem in bringing down any object from space to ground is the ability to remove the energy which is contained in it. The energy processed by bodies at tremendous velocities are very high. The kinetic energy is very, very high. And it can be taken away only by some force that you apply in opposite direction to take away all the energy. Either you can use aerodynamics. When you are traveling through air, you can use the drag as a retarding mechanism. In moon, there is no atmosphere, and you have to use only the engines to kill the velocity. And this velocity has to be killed in 2 ways. Any orbital object is having tangential velocity with respect to the body about which it is orbiting. But ultimately, it has to land vertically. So there will be a vertical velocity because gravity pulls it down all the time. And the moment you reduce horizontal velocity, it will fall like a stone. And if you want to stop it, then you need to give an opposite direction velocity. So the whole process of killing the velocity is a continuous process in which both vertical and horizontal velocities are to be killed in a controlled manner so as to reach at the point that it has zero horizontal velocity and zero vertical velocity, or reasonable low value of vertical velocity, absolutely no horizontal velocity as well. So this is a trick and how to do it. It's a very complex mathematical problem in which requires fuel optimality issues, the capability, the power plant capability, the dynamics of the body, all this plays a lot of roles. So that design process I am not explaining here, but I want to tell you that there is a process in which we start the whole process at 100 kilometers. So 100 kilometer orbit, the velocity will be reduced in such a manner that it will have an orbit of 100 kilometer apogee and 30 kilometer perigee. And from that point, it starts the descending process. It's called the powered descent phase. And it is split into various phases. And this whole phase is designed with its guidance schemes, its control algorithms, instrument calibration, the feedbacks. Different instruments come at different times. When it actually travels here, you can't see the ground properly. So you can put a camera and then see how high I am from the surface. Because all this calculation of where it is in this kilometer is simply coming out of the verification orbit from ground. Using radar, we track its trajectory and say it is at 30 kilometer. What's the guarantee it is at 30 kilometer? It can be erroneous due to our tracking errors. So this is called relative navigation. You don't have any information of the local effects. You don't have any information of the terrain here. There could be a hill of few kilometers. There could be a valley of something else. So really the height could be different. So we have to use absolute sensors to find out what height it is really. Either use a radar altimeter or optical system or laser altimeter or similar instruments to find out where exactly it is. So all this will come into play when it has reached a certain height where the sensors will actually start functioning. Until then, we depend on the inertial system which is inside. The inertial system is a laser-based gyroscope which actually measures its position in a manner which a typical inertial sensor measure. So the whole process of traveling from here to here is controlled manner. The body will be, initially it will be like this. The engines will be firing in a manner which will kill all the horizontal velocity. By the time it travels, it has to slowly turn and reach orientations in which the opposite velocity will be killing both the horizontal and vertical velocity. The moment you kill the horizontal velocity, the vertical velocity will start increasing. And you need to start killing it also. So this trajectory has to be so designed. Then there is a phase where we will do certain instrument calibration, keeping the attitude same. It looks at the ground and calibrate all its measuring instruments. So actually very good data comes or not. Then decides to go for the final landing. And at some point, it will also hover and see that it is able to stay stationary and do the measurements to confirm how high it is from the ground. Then make the final descent with a certain fixed velocity. So this was algorithm, but there was something going wrong in Chandrayaan-2. I will quickly explain that part. Possibly some of you may follow, some of you may not follow. It took many days for us to understand because unfortunately this whole event happened in moon and we were not able to collect back the debris. So maybe when we are finally going one day with somebody will go from India and then bring it back. It is still there, so nobody will take it away. But then today we have only the physical reconstruction process of the sensor data and also the hypothesis that we put forward, which actually matches with the observable data. From that we can synthesize that this has gone wrong in this, and that could be the most probable reason of what happened. That's how any event can be reconstructed. So from the reconstruction we understand certain things, but all of that we understand will not be explained to you for today because I am still in a mission, Chandrayaan-3, and I don't want a backlash. Okay, so the whole of this process, the rough breaking process was really fantastic. Everything was going wrong. No, everything was going right. So everything was going wrong from this point. So I am marking a green and the red where it actually started. There is a deviation started from this point. The point where the deviation started is a point where we keep the attitude constant. The body position was kept constant and it was doing a certain process of called camera coasting. So it was taking the images of the surface and trying to correlate with and sending it as correlate with the images inside or references inside. Then after this process created certain anomalies which couldn't be recovered in the further process. So finally, when the algorithm in this couldn't foresee the possibility of that things developing and the intelligence available was not enough, or something went wrong in that. Some software errors happened, so algorithmic errors happened. We put unnecessary constraint which couldn't come out of it. So finally it ended up with a crash. And we will see here that the whole of the last of the information that we received was at a height of around 335 meters. And the whole thing happened almost 800 meters away from the actual landing site. Less than that we crashed. So that's what happened. Now we'll explain a little more of the detail. The whole of the orbit was perfect, and it started, the camera coasting started, then only the problem started. The first of the problem that happened was the thrust of these 4 engines was slightly higher. And it was slightly higher, but it was still within the bound of the engine, supposed to be the thrust. But then, when this thrust is higher, there is a correction process of the total acceleration we should do. The algorithm for correcting that was erroneous. So it's called the cumulative thrust was computed at the end. It was supposed to be corrected, because there is a phase that you've seen where attitude is kept constant. We don't want any undue control activity taking place because orientation may change. So it was somehow the importance was given to keep the orientation constant and not to correct all these errors, which was very costly decision algorithmically. So we found that there is an algorithmic error in which the correction process should have been instantaneous. Then this problem would not happen. Then in the fine landing phase, large errors accumulated at the end of the coasting phase, which caused the system not capable of correcting. It started correcting, but then there was an artificial limit inside. The rate at which it can correct was limited by the artificial limit which we put as 10 degrees per second. We were allowing the craft only to turn at that rate. If it was allowed to turn at a faster rate, possibly it would have corrected. But then the designers assumed that there will be no demand of this nature, and unnecessarily system should not rotate it at faster rate. They kept a artificial limit, which is unwanted. So that created the ability to correct and come back to the required orientation. The time was not enough. And when that was not enough, what it was doing, then it found that it is not at the landing site. It is still far away. So the algorithm is trying to say, I want to go there. So algorithm is telling the craft, what it was doing is trying to gain horizontal velocity and move there, whereas it is already having high velocity, vertical velocity. It's not able to kill that velocity. So it created a confusing condition for the entire algorithm. What it has to do, it is always telling you to go and land at that point. Unable to go there, unable to kill this velocity, and the time the computer computed, the total time to go to do the landing. There is an algorithm on board to compute what is the time left, and based on which the whole process will be designed. That time was happened to be lesser than what it should have been. A few more seconds more, if the algorithm gives you, it would have landed still safer. So I said in a very simple language, I don't know whether you understood all of these issues, but then for the time being, I will only limit that much for the sake of it. So the essence of this problem was a wrong implementation of an algorithm on board. And second, the artificially limiting the parameters unnecessarily without foresight of failure. So the whole design was done based on a success-oriented means, not a failure-oriented approach. The moment you do that, there are possibilities like that. This is the first lesson that came out of this. Now you can see when on the moon, this is supposed to land here. This should have been the landing point, but it landed here, almost 800 meters. Okay, 482 kilometers. Yeah. And are you able to see the lander here? Sure, you are not able to see now, no? Now can you see? So it is still there. So this is an image from the high resolution camera that is on board the Chandrayaan-2, which took this image. So hopefully we will be able to take images later as well. So the lander, it actually crashed at a location which is very near to a crater, but still a safer location if it was a good landing. But this was a landing point which was only half a kilometer by half a kilometer size. Now we have done certain modifications to handle these problems I mentioned, and how we are overcoming it, I will explain to you from now. Okay. Now in the mission objective of Chandrayaan-3 is just the same, have a safe and soft landing. Without that, the next objectives cannot be met. We cannot do the rover coming out, we can't do the experiments. So first and foremost objective is to have safe and soft landing. So the entire approach is towards that. The masses have gone some changes. The orbital lander, there has been a lot of changes. It's not the same orbiter, it's not the same lander. We have done a lot of improvements on the lander became heavier and the orbiter or the propulsion module became lighter. All the instruments which were there in the orbiter last time all removed now because there is no need. Already an orbiter there with all the instruments and it has all the capabilities to handle the mission as an orbiter itself. So it doesn't have to have all the features of a typical orbiter now. So we could reduce the mass of that, and all that mass we saved from here are added to that, and we added more propellant. The tanks were stretched. We added more propellant. We strengthened the legs. We strengthened extra solar panels. We added new sensors, and we added redundant electronics. We added powerful batteries, more than what was there, and specifically new sensors. So the overall mass was nearly the same. So the entire process of moving from Earth to Moon remains the same, but of course the number of burns here changes a little bit. And the landing process is entirely changed. I think I'll come on and try to explain that part in a very simple language. Essentially, the changes are the following. One, we found out why the engine is developing a thrust which is higher. So we found out through a lot of extensive tests, we found that there is a valve which controls the throttling of the engine. Now, this engine is not working at a constant thrust. It actually changes the thrust based on the need of that condition. So there is a valve which controls the flow of the propellants. And this valve was not responding in a manner that is needed. If it is commanded at a highest rate, it doesn't respond at that point. And this was found out much later. And we reduced the slewing rate of this valve so as to achieve the same response as expected. And the logic errors in implementing the incremental thrust, there was an error which was corrected. The biggest error which was there, the instantaneous thrust regulation scheme was not there. In the camera costing phase, I said, no, there were accumulation of errors, but it was tried to be corrected at the end, which is not a right method. It should have been corrected right then and there. So this implementation algorithm is the most important thing that will, if at all it has to save this mission for Chandrayaan-3 will happen. We also increase the margins of control system or the ability of the guidance system to handle higher thrust dispersions. It went up almost up to 90 newtons per engine we can handle. And even if any deviation occur, it can retarget, it can salvage, and emergency landing it can do, which all were not there at that time. For example, if the landing is supposed to be at that point, and if it knows that I cannot reach there, then it will land there itself. So this capability was not there. It was always trying to reach that point. So we need to have such features, and the artificial limits are all widened. And we widened in such a manner that the initial conditions of the mission are also widened. Even if it is inserted in this algorithm at this point with a larger dispersion to the extent of even 6 sigma, it will still make a soft landing. And this is how the whole mission is designed. And the most important part is we added a new instrument called laser Doppler velocimeter, which is the absolute measurement of the velocities in 3 directions using a sensor mounted on the Chandrayaan. So we know its velocity exactly, so it can plan properly, which was very important instrument in all moon missions. This instrument used to be there, and we tried to get this instrument from somewhere outside, and we couldn't buy last time in Chandrayaan-2. And we understood if Chandrayaan-3 has to happen, this instrument is mandatory. And it was developed by ISRO people in our own laboratory in a record time and qualified to be one of the best instruments today. There were also a lot of corrections we did in software. In fact, it is not proper for me to explain all of this. I think it may not be needed. But essentially, what we are looking at is we look at simulations. I think anybody who works on such softwares will understand. There is nothing ideal in a world. No, nothing works in the nominal. Everything will be over a distribution. It's a statistical sense, many parameters, mass, center of gravity, the control system, the thrust, the sensor data, the gravity, everything is actually probabilistic. So when you do studies of any mechanical system, dynamical system, you need to look at the probabilistic nature of the problem and simulate in a Monte Carlo sense what can happen when scenarios evolve. And here you can introduce failures of various systems, redundancies, etc. And what will be the next path it will take. So we focused this time on simulations, extensive simulations, where generally we look at nominal plus certain sigma dispersions, but we look at even additive extreme of all critical parameters. What will happen? We will also look at the limits of performance, which can trigger it to failure. We also looked at up to 6 sigma's perturbations. I know 6 sigma, many things may not survive, but there are failure cases in 6 sigma. And we are also stressing the software for test cases in which software failures can occur, can be triggered by computational errors. And we created additional test beds in various labs and see hardware, software test beds to see the software and hardware are very good. So the whole of the focus on the last few years was in simulation and getting guarantee of the whole implementation. And many of the sensors which were there, I think you must be interested to understand about sensors who are working. Absolute velocity meter, velocimeters, laser Doppler velocimeter, which actually uses a laser beam to do this. There is a camera-based velocity detection scheme, which takes images based on the pixels. You can change from one image to another. You can detect the velocity. There are 2 altimeters, which is one works on laser and another works on RF-based K-band radar altimeter. This both works on reflections and it estimates the height, and all the specifications have been much strengthened. There is a hazard detection camera. This is again an interesting camera. Once it is about to land, it has to see there is no boulder or a crater. And we have to have a certain area which is devoid of these issues. There only it has to land. If you find just at the nadir, where we are looking straight down, if you find it's not safe, it will immediately make a choice to move either horizontally in any direction, provided their safe zone is available 150 meters away. So this is algorithm. So if that is so, it will move and go to 150 meters. If it is beyond that, it will land there itself. So this is the algorithm. So you cannot do beyond 150 meters. The fuel available is just not enough to go further. So this camera has to be extremely good. Take images, because when you look at a surface which has a 3D variations of height and depth, and when you take a 2D image, you can understand you will not be able to detect a depression or a hill. No, both look alike in a 2D image. You can't understand which is a depression or a hill. So actually you need a stereo image capability to do that. But here they have created an algorithm in which because sun is shining, there is a shadow. The shadow effects on hill and valleys are one and the same. If you look at a 2D image of a valley with a shadow, a hill with a shadow of same size, it will look the same in a 2D image. So it may not be able to detect the edges, things like that. So there is an algorithm to convert this image to a 2D vector graphics and then compute that it is still at a safer zone and move either direction to see whether it is a safe zone. So this is an interesting camera that does that job with an onboard algorithm. And finally, we have the laser gyro-based inertial reference units. And this is a very, very critical package which is developed by our IASU, which is flying in all rockets and satellites. Still doing very well. And this gives the inertial measurement, and this is calibrated against stars. The orientation of the craft at any point is updated with respect to the universal references, and this is uploaded to this to make it always right in its orientation. So this is used as a primary sensor, and all other sensors are secondary sensors. So with so much of sensors, only this can actually go and land somewhere. There were a lot of changes in the propulsion. I mentioned about the rate at which it is corrected. That is, we call it pulses per second. So it was originally 900 reduced to 500, which actually make it little sluggish, but for the dynamics, it is good enough. There we found that the slows of the propellant inside the tank can create control structure interactions. And because, propellant in a tank which is half filled can oscillate and make the body of the satellite move. So we have to suppress that by giving a damping. We have also changed the thrust limits and also the structure of the propulsion. I don't want to go all of that, but all of this has been tested extensively to say that the changes we made in the propulsion are good enough. So the propulsion system will look like it. This is for the orbiter side. There is a single engine, and there are 8 small engines which actually does the travel from Earth to Moon. And until the capture, this is used. Fuel, oxidizer, its own regulators, valves, and things like that, which operates on command. And each of these engines are operated by its own valves. So it's a very complex circuit with so many elements which actually powers the orbiter. Same is the case with the lander. The lander has 4 engines and its own thrusters that controls it. It's almost similar to the orbiter, but the engines are much more powerful here. The amount of energy that need to be killed is much higher. Now, in the guidance and control, of course, there has been a lot of contribution from Indian Institute of Science. Professor Padi is here. We had extensive work with him and the students, his students who are there in ISRO. And they were the people who actually worked on this guidance scheme, developed it. Major changes have been made in this guidance scheme today to handle various issues that we encountered. One of them is the continuity of the engine thrust profiles. And also the regulation scheme which you mentioned, the perturbation I mentioned already, and also to look at the other multiple mission paths in case of anomaly, the safety that has been built in, control I have already told. So for brevity, I am not going into the guidance algorithm at all. Maybe you can ask Dr. Padi to give another talk at some other point on the guidance algorithm, because if I start speaking, he will have objection. Now coming to the touchdown point of view. So earlier the mass of the Chandrayaan craft was 700, now it is 800 by the time it touches down. But what we have done is the overall energy absorbing capability of the legs have been now improved. But of course the velocity is too high, none of this will help us, because hitting at 10 meter per second, 40 meter per second like last time, it's not going to help us. So what we did is last time the upper limit was 2 meter per second, this time the upper limit is 3 meter per second plus. So it will be able to handle up to that velocity, because the energy associated with the speed falling objects are too high. You will know if some stone fall on your head only, you will realize how much energy the stone got. So killing that such energy is actually very difficult. So there is certain energy absorbing, crushing, damping systems incorporated in the legs to handle this. Another important change we did is the landing area is now expanded. The most important gain we got from Chandrayaan-2 is the entire image of the Chandrayaan moon surface is now available to a resolution of 25 centimeter. That I can see 25 centimeter big items in 1 pixel. So that much accuracy images are now available, the entire moon. So using that, we have made a beautiful map now, and the whole area where we are going to land is now expanded. The entire track is now observed where it is the best track to land. And we have selected a landing area which is typically of the size 4 kilometer long and 2.5 kilometer wide. Last time it was half a kilometer by half a kilometer. So it has a larger area, and this area is selected in which there are no huge craters or boulders. So it is safer. If at all you are not able to land in the middle of this point, anywhere landing could be possible. So this is one important change that we made. So the entire area is now gridded, mapped. The whole of this information is actually staying within the Chandrayaan-2. It is already stored on board. So whenever it takes a picture of some location near to this, it will compare with the onboard stored image, and immediately it can, if you are able to correlate based on feature matching, it can say I am here now. So, and then rest of the travel is well defined. So it will be able to assign its coordinates to the area in which it is measured. So it will be quickly able to match with this and do. If the matching doesn't happen, again, that is a failure mode, and how to handle it is another issue. So we have a primary landing site. We also have an alternate landing site where similar exercise is done and stored on board. So on the day 23rd, if you are not able to land due to any other technical problem developing, the whole thing will be shifted by a few days, and we will go and land in an alternate landing site, because it won't come back to the same landing site, because the orbit is moving around the body. It will take many days to come back to that. We have a particular condition in which the landing should happen. The day in which it lands must be at this location, and it should be the day in which the sun rises, or it has already risen to be the day on the moon. If it lands on a location where it's night, moon nights are 15 days longer. So once it lands in the night zone, it will continue to remain in night for that many days, and by the time sun comes on, the entire electronics would have been dead. So it has to land in a daytime, and it happens only by the evening. Then whatever time available for you to do experiment will be hardly 1 or 2 days. So we have to design such a way that it lands on a day, beginning of a day, and so that we have the entire 14-15 days available for you to conduct experiments. Because the only way to generate energy power is only sun, nothing else available on moon. So that is the criticality of landing. Now, on the software side, there were many changes on the navigation, guidance and control software. So I won't explain this so much because it may not be of great interest or relevance to you. But in the most important general improvements, which is possibly could be helping us, is the structure, which I mentioned that after the landing, we understood that we need to beef up here and there, some places. That has been done. The thermal environment of the entire craft has been once again revisited because we changed our solar panels this time. New solar panels are added for energy generation, so it required a more thermal analysis. The mechanisms has been strengthened. The radio frequency communication protocols which are available on board were limiting last time to send the data, so it has been, rates have been increased almost 200 kilobyte per second, 500 kilobyte per second. Also the images can come at faster rate now. The power side also strengthened, the ability to generate more power, and also the battery capacity increases. The wheels are the one which actually controls it. You know, reaction wheels, we call it just wheels. The wheels inside spin it at very high speeds to generate the control moments when thrusters are not firing. So these wheels are again now, the capacity is almost double now, so as to handle the orientation change much faster. So these are some of the major changes that we did. And the most important part is the test. Before we went into Chandrayaan-3 launch decision, the amount of tests we did is really hundreds of tests. But I'll classify them into this three categories. One is called the integrated cold test, integrated hot test, and landing leg related test. I will explain some of this little later, and the amount of facilities and work we did to validate the design on ground. I think, you know, if you want to test anything that is designed for moon to test on ground, what are the challenges? Gravity, of course. And how to create a reduced gravity environment here, is it possible? It is possible. In some extent it is possible. You can put a counterweight. Okay, you can put a balloon, helium balloon to offset the rest of the weight. Mass you cannot change. Okay, then aerodynamics comes into play. So we did some part of it to simulate that. Then the interaction between the sensors, structures, propulsion is the key of this. So we decided that we need to put all of them together in some firing, so that we find that when the engines are firing with the electronics is there, its sensors are properly measuring, which we didn't do last time. And I'll explain that part. So sensors, I think I have already explained. The communication is another important part. See, after it landing and you are not able to know whether it has landed properly, whether the data is coming from there is not proper, the mission will be declared failure, right? You don't know anything about it. Probably it would have landed safely. So what we did is that we must have a certain communication protocols of multi-direction protocol. So the Chandrayaan-3 propulsion module is an independent system. It has no role after it was separated out of the lander. But the Chandrayaan-2 orbiter is still healthy. And what we decided is the Chandrayaan-3 lander will communicate with the orbiter, and the orbiter will send information back to Earth. Suppose it fails, then the lander has an ability to communicate direct to Earth. So this is also built in, and the rover will communicate back and forth between the lander. So we have tied up with the ground stations, not only in India, all across the world, the ground stations are supporting us for this mission. For every day, today also when the firing takes place, the ground stations in Europe, ground stations in US will be tracking this and giving us this data real time. With that data only, we can actually do all the calculations to match the numbers are proper. So this is a huge network which we created to support this mission. So this is how the spacecraft looks like. The lander modules look like. The propellant tanks you can see here. This is the leg part, the solar panels here, and this is I think it is the same. And this is how the rover will come out. So there is a ramp here. The ramp will be deployed in two phases. The first part it will fold upward, then get latched, then together it will come down. Then the rover is also kept there with a locking mechanism, and the locking mechanism will be released, and the solar panel will be deployed, and it will be roving down with a controlled release of the craft using a cable. So it will come down, and once it touches the surface, the cable will be released and it will be free to move out. So this is how the rover will finally come out. And there are cameras on this which will observe this coming out and taking pictures. And so also the cameras on the rover as well. So the glimpses of the realization of Chandrayaan in our laboratory, just images, but anyway, I'll skip this. Now, going to the special test in Chandrayaan-3 must be the most interesting part. So, the first test is using a helicopter. So, we integrate all of this inside the helicopter. The entire Chandrayaan-3 electronics and sensors are integrated in a helicopter with its antenna, the radar altimeter, the laser altimeter, the observing windows all facing to the earth. We fly through various terrains and then see how it interacts. But the problem here is that the speeds the helicopter traveling are hardly few meters per second, at the best maybe 50 meters per second. You know, the Chandrayaan craft is going to move at almost 500 meters per second, almost 10 times the speed when it actually is sensing. So this can never be simulated. The speed of the craft and the sensor data coming in with the speed on the terrain can never be simulated. So that's a limitation, but still that's the extent that we could do and simulate. Second series of test is this, and this is called the cold test, where there is no engine actually firing, and it is going through a electronic simulation of the sensors and computers. And this test, we use a tall crane. It's the 80-meter tall crane in which the craft is hung using a bungee cord, and the entire weight is counterweighted with a latching release mechanism. So once the engine fires, this can float actually. And this whole of this has been made with a mass which is almost equal to the possible mass reduction that we can do. So very small quantity of propellant is loaded. It is again re-engineered to make a lightweight onboard weight so as to balance only the mass equivalent to the reaction that will be feeling only on the surface of the moon, so that it can actually hover. And this is tested in various conditions with its electronics and sensors to see the overall algorithm is proper, including its hovering capability, lateral movement, etc. So this is the crane test that we did. But every time when we do this firing, you have to take it up, you have to fill it, again bring it back, refurbish it. You know, the fuel used is very so dangerous that you can't even go nearby, that you will die if it leaks on your face. So, and the other test is the lander leg related test. So here they created a lunar simulant into which this will be dropped at various speeds, orientations, tilt, etc., and then find whether leg survives. So you can see when the helicopter was flying, there were artificial craters created to see whether it is able to capture. So we created craters along the track and then flew the helicopter to see whether the images are properly captured. Similarly, you can see the terrain of the Sriharikota where this test was done. This is the crane, and this is the platform on which it will be served. So we have a counterweight system with various weights which will be released so as to create the appropriate reactions for it to give for stability. And this is the landing site where the sand is filled here. One is a horizontal area and this is a tilted area where it will be dropping on inclined surfaces. Still it will be able to absorb the energy. So the energy absorbent honeycombs that you can see, which with its own touch sensor. This touch sensor is so important for on the day of landing, because the engines on board the Chandrayaan-3 will be stopped only by the touch sensor triggering that, I have made a contact on the surface. Now let me go into the landing process, which is going to happen now. So it's a complex process. So again, only graphs and curves I can use. I can't use any other images. So the first part of the process, going around the earth, traveling all the way to moon, is going to be completed. So many people have asked me why India is taking 45 days for reaching moon, whereas Americans have done in 4 days. No, many people won't understand what is involved in this whole process and why we are taking such an approach. Of course, this is not a very efficient approach, because there are dangers associated with such mission. Because we go through the Vallennian belts multiple times, it go through radiation many times, and the systems have to operate for much longer duration. So it's actually not a good scenario. The only difficulty that we have is we don't have a rocket which is powerful enough to give the required velocity at the injection point. If you had enough velocity, it was straight going to moon. But then still we won't do that, because the precision in which that it is injected to the moon is so important that it has to arrive at the moon at the right point. So if there is a rocket related issue, then it cannot be corrected sometimes we may not be able to correct in the translunar path. So maybe one time rotation could have been okay, but then this becomes, even the GSLV Mark III is not enough for a moon mission of this class. So we have to do this process. Then it is captured only in a large elliptical orbit because it is unsafe to capture on a smaller orbit, because we have to capture it at this type of orbit so that you can in a controlled manner do the orbital determination and bring it back to 100 kilometers safely. So the 100 kilometer and beyond, then other composite, the lander and orbiter will be at the same orbital plane, and then we have to decide to separate it at some point. And that separation will take place on a fixed day. I will tell you later. And after the separation, the lander will be tested in many ways, whether the engines are healthy, all engines are healthy, the sensors are healthy. So we do control testing of each of them while it is still in orbit. We'll switch on 2 engines for short duration, see it's working, then switch on the other 2 engines, then we'll check the control system, we'll check the sensors. So there will be a routine running inside to check all of them. And during this process, some energy is added. So that energy adding process will result in a reduced orbit, which is going to be 100 kilometer by 30 kilometer. And it will continue in that orbit for a few days until we reach the designated day of 23rd of this month for landing. So on the 23rd of the month, that we will be going through a similar process of landing, where a lot of changes have been done in the whole of this approach, which is mostly in the guidance scheme and also the sensor validation scheme, essentially. So one of the point which I mentioned earlier is the continuity from this point to this point in terms of the thrust value. We should not end up with jumps in the demand of thrust at a point in time. And these jumps are essentially the dangerous ones. So we have used a polynomial guidance scheme, which is higher order polynomial guidance scheme than what we used last time. And it also has higher thrust levels specified so that in case it is reduced. See, last time what happened, it was operating at a thrust level whether it was not possible to go below. And we also have, I think the readability is poor, so that's why I'm not, yeah. So it starts at a velocity of almost 1.68 kilometer per second. So from this point to this point, it takes hardly 30 minutes. So it starts at this velocity, which is 1,680 meters per second. With its horizontal vertical velocity is almost 0. It will reach vertical velocity nearly 1 to 2 meters per second with no horizontal velocity. So there are very key events going to take place here. A altitude of 7.4 kilometers is so crucial. At 800 kilometers, we have certain events. And at 150 meters, we have certain events. And at 10 meters, we have certain events and decisions. So the entire process is prepared in such a way that at these altitudes, there are certain things taking place. Critical things only I'll tell you. This is a height in which that we can make use of the sensors for actually measuring the reflections and calibrate them. 150 meters is a height in which we can make a decision whether there is a hazard or not a hazard. So that decision will be made here. And if there is a hazard detected, it will move laterally and go in, land it somewhere else. If there is no hazard, it will make the landing straight there. So this is how the whole program process is organized. Unlike the camera holding phase, we do not have a scheme like this. And the continuity of thrust from this point to this point is totally assured by the guidance scheme today. And that is the essence of the change in guidance. I will only show you a simulation result of the whole landing process, which we have done in Monte Carlo sense, which shows the landing possibilities within the domain of the landing under parametric perturbations, which includes the initial condition perturbation, thrust perturbation, mass CG, control, errors, failures, etc. So simulation tell you that we are safe. So hopefully we are going to be. If mathematics is correct, Professor Rangarajan should. Okay, now final part of this is a science goal. After all this has been achieved, if it lands properly, then it has to do some science experiments. It has to do. So we will look at what are the land payloads on board and what a science it's going to do. So there are instruments which are designed at various laboratories in ISRO centers. There are no foreign hosted payload this time. All the payloads instruments were developed and designed here. So the instruments are called CHASTE, which is called Chandra Surface Thermophysical Experiment. We have a RAMBA payload, which is basically a Langmuir probe, which looks at the low altitude measurements. There is an instrument for measuring seismic activities, essentially an accelerometer package, very sensitive, and a laser reflectometer array, which is provided by NASA. It's simply a mirror surface which you can use as a laser, and you will get a reflection back from there. So we can actually measure the distance very precisely from Earth to Moon using that. So they have given it, we have just fitted on top of it, nothing else we did. So on the rover, these are the payloads. There is a LIBS, which is a laser-induced breakdown spectroscope, APXS, which is alpha particle X-ray spectrometer, SHAPE, which is another payload, which is spectropolarimetry of habitable planet Earth. So the essence of these measurements are, CHASTE is a payload which will measure the, anyway, I have some slides which will give you a little more detail, so I'll go there. The first payload I am explaining is about the lunar seismic activity measurement, ILSA, which is a MEMS-based sensor accelerometer, six accelerometer, which will be dropped from the surface in a controlled manner. It will come to the surface of the moon and it will be connected electrically, and it will measure very low vibration ranges in on the surface. Yeah, give something. See you. So it will record signature sensors of various events, like somewhere on the moon, assume a asteroid or some elements are coming and hitting. It will generate a small vibration. It will generate a wave through the body, and it will be measured here. So it is measurement of very low internal activity of the moon also can be measured if there are no hitting events. So we will characterize it based on these measurements later. Second instrument is a very interesting instrument, CHASTE, where there is a probe like this, which is basically made of a phenolic material reinforced with some composites, and inside there are thermocouples which will measure the temperature, and there are heaters which will give the heat. Basically what it's going to do is that we have a dry mechanism which will pierce this on the surface of the moon for almost 10 centimeter. It will heat it and then measure the temperature variations along the length, which actually measures the thermal characteristics of the regolith on the surface. So this is an experiment, and based on that there are some theories which they will explain the energy balance on the surface of the moon, how heat energy is not transmitted through and things like that, which are hypotheses which will be verified through this instrument. The next is a Langmuir probe, which is measuring, it's a probe with a spherical end, which is electrically biased to the surface of the ground, and it will measure the charged particle or the plasma environment. You know, the surface of the moon is not having any atmosphere. And they say there are electrons and plasma very close to the surface, and this plasma atmosphere is actually moving up and down during day and night. And this variation is something that this probe will measure. So it is also a very high sensitive instrument which is capable of measuring this type of data. Then we have a alpha particle X-ray spectrometer which is put on the rover. Here you can see there is a detector here, but these are alpha particle emitters which is radioactive in it, which is based on a curium source which is put there in extremely small quantities, and this alpha particle will go and hit the material on the surface, and it will emit the X-rays, and this X-rays will be picked by the sensor here, and it will make the sense of all the elemental composition on the surface of the moon. So this is one way of understanding elemental composition. And you can see on the end of this rover you have the instrument. There is a deployment in which this sensor will look at the surface and then do the measurement. The next instrument is called a laser-induced breakdown spectrometer, which is similar to this, but a slightly different principle, in which a low pulse laser will be used and to cause evaporation of the material on the surface, and this evaporating gas will be spectroscopically analyzed to find out the similar constituent elements present in this material. So these two payloads will be capable of doing the elemental composition analysis of the regolith of the moon. Now there is yet another instrument which was been added very last, because we found the orbiter or the propulsion module is simply empty, and there is some experiment can be done using this. So we put a payload called the SHAPE, which is a spectropolarimetry of the habitable planet Earth. You know, all of you must be knowing that there are thousands of exosolar planets, Earth-like planets possibly, and some of them may be having Earth-like environment, having water, the atmosphere, the elemental composition, and a temperature which is conducive for life to exist. Maybe human beings can go one day. And how to detect it? They are far away and they don't emit any light. And most of the illumination spectral inputs come through the stars which are behind them. When it passes through the atmosphere, you will get certain output. And this output, if you look at it, then you will be able to understand. Here in case of Earth, it is the reflected energy output from the sun that comes out of the Earth, which you measure. Whereas for those exosolar planets, it could be reflected or transmitted through the atmosphere. So this measures that and then make characterization of Earth as a planet, which is observed from a farther distance. So we can make use of it for characterizing future exosolar planets. That's the objective of this experiment. And this is mounted on the outside of the Chandrayaan propulsion module. Hopefully, we will be able to characterize, because this is again a trial basis instrument. And further activities, as I mentioned, so these are the things that are going to happen now. So all of us are now anxiously waiting for it to be captured by the moon. Anyway, it has to capture. Now it is having gravity. So I have no doubt it will be captured. But the only thing is it has to enter into the right orbit. It should not be into a wrong orbit. Precisely the long burn duration, the orientation, etc. already calculated. And it will be triggered automatically. And all the commands will be uploaded based on the current understanding of its position. And after that, it enters into elliptical orbit. We have a lot of activity to take place in the elliptical orbit, bringing down the orbit, and finally reaching 100 kilometers. And this much we have done last time. I think there is no uncertainty on it. And then we have to make the separation between the propulsion module and lander possibly on 17th if everything goes well. Then make the powered descent based on the current position and everything. Then deployment of the ramp and the rover and conducting the experiments. So last time we had the problem here. I believe this time whatever changes and modification we have done will definitely lead to a safe landing, and we are all hoping for it to have the soft touchdown and the ability to deploy the rover and put it on the moon surface, and to have this image one day taken from our camera. So this is what we hope now to happen. So let me conclude here, and thank you so much for this opportunity to present. Provided organizers allow me, the time is not. Actually, it has to leave for that. Huh? One or two questions, okay? I don't know.
We have images from one more camera
Chandrayaan?
I mean, the onboard, it has onboard camera to capture all.
No, we don't have.
How do you decide on how much redundancy to take to the system? There must be the lander, and there is also a bouncing scheme that you do, like a bounce, like Kasa's land goes on the mass.
That's a different scheme. It's not a propulsion assisted scheme. Yeah.
But how it's a redundant system?
It's not a redundant scheme. See, there are different schemes to that. Mars is entirely different because Mars has got an atmosphere. And there is a way to decelerate through aerodynamic deceleration in Mars. So it has still an atmosphere. Whereas Moon, there is no atmosphere. Landing is much more difficult. I can require surface to reduce the speed. Because you have seen the area of Mars landing, balloon-based landing, or the train-based landing, and propulsion assisted landing. There are multiple they are done. Here, also possible. But we have designed it like this.
Thank you very much because your paucity of time has to leave because the lander has to be captured by moon.
See, the reason for coming was essentially the the ability of the control system not to be able to track or require commands. You know there is a command term is coming, and if the power plant is designed not having the ability to follow it, it will go somewhere there. One is generated large control demand due to accumulated cost correction principle I mentioned that. Second issue was the ability to draw the weight of servers unnecessarily control. So that will be the second. So we made those corrections done. At the end of that phase, there will be no accumulated cost. There will be no demand for correction. Second is, if at all due to any incident happens, the ability to rotate is not enhanced from 30 to the second to the power plant maximum capability. So we don't expect that the term demand will not come. The ability to prevent the possibility itself is a cost correction. Thank you. All that will be declared at the appropriate price.
The mentioned that there is a lack of specific rockets which sell higher mass. So it's still working on new engine technologies which could increase the payload mass. It's still working on new engine technology.
No, but I can't feel the curiosity of a person. Let's say you are our yes, we are working on it. The whole idea is to use the payload capability of the rocket. We already started the program with the non-speed engine, which is in 100 glass. With our 18, we use if we get in our future rockets, our payload will be almost 3 times of Chandrayaan-1. And we are also working on semi-cryogenicity engine. The testing program has started. But that is only from JSW Mark will use the payload to system. But we are looking far beyond that, and God has already started.
Thank you very much. Some of the students of IIC they want to declare that they want to start their rocket club even in 20 seconds.
Good afternoon, all the dignitaries and ISRO chairman. So, in front of ISRO chairman, I want to declare that the student council has taken an initiative to make the rocket club at ISC, official rocket club. All the students can join there, and the announcement will come soon. Along the same line, we also start robotics and many other clubs. And I want to let chairman of ISRO know that we have broadcasted the launch event and we will also broadcast the landing event.
Thank you very much for the well articulated, informative, and enclosing lecture on Chandrayaan-3 mission. I request Dr. Pradhan Das to give the word of thanks.
So, I'd like to thank all the audience to patiently hear the crowd, and thank you, sir, for the exciting talk that attracted so many people. I never imagined during COVID time that we would have the hall half full for near the lectures. Last thing is our program of the student community was his best programs. So next I would like to thank all the dignitaries who have come, including the committee members of Professor Pradeep, Anjana Madam, Anjali, and Srivas. And the talk is only possible because of the hard efforts of all the student members of the memorial lecture series, led by B.P. sir and also Commander Vice President. So, happy to thank you to organize such a wonderful series. Then I would like to thank Director and Patron ICA for giving the hall. Then the student council also who was the exercise, and welcome. I think most of the students here are celebrating their first week in the campus. So welcome you all with the wonderful lecture. So I would like to continue bringing such wonderful and interesting lectures. Thank you. We will now break So I like to welcome our president, Professor Chandrayaan, to give a mentor to Sunil sir. This is small gesture. So post the I will consider again for human rights session. Sir will have to leave because of the time possibility. But when the sir will be coordinating the session in Q&A, there will be from ISRO who can answer the questions. And also the human rights session people are there. They would like to share also about the values of so we will have post the session. We will assemble 4:30 we will assemble again for the remembrance session. Thank you. नहीं अभी इधर बहुत टेक्निकल प्रॉब्लम हुआ था क्या करें वो नहीं होगा ತುಂಬ ತಗೊಂಡಬೇಕು ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬ್ में मिल जाएगा यूट्यूब